Hello. It's currently it's December 30th, last 2 days of 2023. So, what do us video game players, gamers, like to do at the end of the year? We like to go back and reminisce a little bit about the previous year, talk about our favorite games. So that's what I'm here to do. I'm going to do basically a top 10 of my favorite games for 2023. But before I get started with that, I want to do an honorable mentions first. Because, usually you do honorable mentions a little bit later. But to set expectations, I figured I'd start with it, So that's what I'm going to do. And my first honorable mention is going to be Final Fantasy 16. Yeah, not in my top 10 exactly. I did enjoy Final Fantasy 16. It's a good game. For full context, I've been playing Final Fantasy since I was like 8 years old. I remember playing Final Fantasy 2. They call it, it's really Final Fantasy 4, but it was called Final Fantasy 2 on the Super Nintendo in the United States. And I remember playing that way back in the day with a friend of mine. We played through the whole game. So that's almost 30 years of Final Fantasy I've been playing. And I'm just saying that to set, so people understand I've been playing Final Fantasy for a long time, pretty much. Not that it gives me any authority on it, but, Final Fantasy 16, in my opinion, is probably the best single-player Final Fantasy game since at least the PS1 era. Since the PS1 era, I would say that, yeah. Some people love Final Fantasy 10, but for me, 10 has always been where the series kind of went into a direction I didn't really enjoy too much. But Final Fantasy 16 also has an issue where it's competing with other games since then and, currently. And the problem with Final Fantasy 16 for me, it has good combat, It goes a little bit too far. Well, not too far. It doesn't go far enough in the action department, and it doesn't stay rooted in the RPG roots enough either. So it kind of doesn't feel as good as the best games in either genre, DMC or Kingdom Hearts. Let's say that. I think Kingdom Hearts is more fun to play than Final Fantasy 16 is for me, even though they're both action RPGs. And Devil May Cry 5 in particular is way better. Is way more fun to play than Final Fantasy 16. So that's one thing. But anyone who's been playing Final Fantasy for a long time knows that story in Final Fantasy is very important. It's one of the key aspects of these games. That's why we enjoy them so much. We want what we're playing for. That's what, in my opinion, that's why they're so highly regarded. Final Fantasy VII is highly regarded because of its characters and the story. And I think the story in 16 is good up to a point. And part of my issue with it is coming from Final Fantasy 14, and I know the devs, the dev team from 14 worked on 16, including some of the narrative team. So I know how well a story by that team can be. And Final Fantasy 16, for me, falls off when it comes to the main antagonist, the Ultima. I think it's a cool design. I love the vibe of Ultima. I don't like the whole story of Ultima. I don't like everything after a certain point in the game. Well, let's say the midpoint. People will probably know what I'm talking about. After, let's just mention, this is going to be spoilers, Bahamut. Bahamut is the apex of that game. And past that, it kind of doesn't, it's not great. It doesn't reach those heights ever again. And even that whole moment leading up to it, you finding out like what happened with, the icon or whatever, the dominant for Bahamut, and how he's manipulated and all that. It's a good story. That's the best part of the game. But dealing with Ultima itself, themselves, how they refer to themselves, it just isn't very good, in my opinion. The other issue is side quests. Side quests, I think, after that point get actually pretty decent. Like the narrative in those quests are interesting compared to where it was before, where you're kind of just doing busy work. So yeah, I think it is the best Final Fantasy in my opinion since at least 9, but I still think there is room to be much better. So there you go. So that's how I feel about Final Fantasy 16 and why it's now in my top 10. The other game I'll mention, there's a bunch of games that could be on my honorable mentions. Just Jedi Survivor one. What else was there? I have a list. So I pulled up my list, my honorable mentions list. I'll just run off some names before naming the main one I want to talk about. There's like Final Fantasy 14, which I play a lot. This has been a bad year for 14 in my opinion, but I'm not going to harp on that too much on this video. Diablo 4. Diablo 4 is decent. I think it could be a lot better. The campaign for Diablo 4 was good. I didn't like everything after that. Well, I haven't really played too much after that because I didn't like Season 1. And the other one is Trails into Reverie. That's the Trail series. I love it, and I think it would be in my top 10 if it wasn't. It technically came out in previous years. I had already played it because fan translations and all that. That's why I said it in my top 10, even though it came out in the U.S. this year. Trails in general. If you play video games, if you love JRPGs, play the Trails series. The big game is Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 is not in my top 10. I enjoy the idea. I understand why it's so big, why it's so popular, rather. You have iconic characters at this point, like Astarion and Karlach and all those other characters. And the narrative is interesting for the most part. It's a little too campy for my taste. That's one issue I have with it. But also, it's also a very horny game. That's another thing. It's either you like it or you don't. The vibe of it. But for me, the main issue for me is it's too overwhelming. CRPGs in general, I've always had that issue with. Even playing the old Baldur's Gate games and Icewind Dale, Plains of Torment, and I think that's one of them. Pillars of Eternity. I've tried a lot of these games, and they're just too much for me. You walk into a room, you have tons of different choices. You can go in any direction. And for me, I prefer a more focused experience. I love open world games, but something that gives me a little bit of a direction, or at least like with Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, which we'll hear about later in one of my other videos. Like Tears of the Kingdom, you can go in any direction, but you only have a small skill set. You don't have rows of options, items, and all this that you can mess with at any time. Obviously, there's so many expansive things you can do in Tears of the Kingdom, but you always have a goal, pretty much. So, anyway, that's why, for me, Baldur's Gate 3 is not in my top 10. So yeah, there we go. That's my honorable mentions I'm going to throw out there for my top 10, and then I'll be back in my next video. I'll be doing this periodically over maybe the next couple weeks. But yeah, I'll start with number 10 on my next video. Thanks for watching.